In this lesson, we're going to be able to identify where our line intersects with our y-axis. This is why we call it the y-intercept. This will give us the rate of change and the initial value on the graph. Remember, our initial value is where we first start. Our rate of change is how often this line increases at what rate, and it should be a constant rate. Let's read this problem first. Wilson Middle School has money left over for last year's fundraiser. This year, students are selling discount cards for local businesses. The graph shows the leftover money and the amount the school will earn for each card sold. Write an equation that shows the total amount of money the school will have, including leftover money and the amount earned selling X number of cards. Remember, our discount cards are basically like those like 20% off cards, or those little cards that the athletes sell, where if we use it in a store we get a certain discount because it's like a fundraiser. On page 78, it's going to model writing an equation to represent a function shown in a graph. So let's read the problem at the top of the page and figure out where we start first. How do we find the rate of change using the x values and the y values from the points on a graph? Well, we know in our previous lesson, we figured out what our initial plot is, and we figured out how to make a table with the plots already given on our graph. Remember that our rate of change is expressed as a number compared to 1. So let's explain how we first got to where let's first explain how we break down our problem. First of all, what is this problem about? So what are we trying to find out? And last, what information is important in this problem? You know that this problem is about Wilson Middle School using discount cards to raise money by selling discount cards. Answer will usually, what we're trying to find out will usually give us a verb. In this case, it's telling us to write, or sometimes it might end in a question mark. But in this case, in this word problem, it says write an equation that shows the total amount of money the school will have, including leftover money and the amount earned selling the number of cards. Okay, so what we already know is this graph is going to give us some information. Start off, what does X represent on our x-axis? It represents the number of cards sold. Is our rate of change. Let's take a look at that graph again. Our rate of change is 2 between the points, each y value. So I'm looking at my y-axis here, and I'm looking at my y value, and it looks like we change every 2 points. So go from, I'm looking at my blue lines, I'm looking at this change here, that's 1, that's 2, and then it changes again at point 3, and it changes again at point 4, and it changes again at point 5, and it changes again at point 2. Okay, and the reason why this happens is because by 20, so I have my 20 here, and then the next change happens at 10. So I'm putting 20 over 10. Okay, so again, I go from 100 to my next point. So my initial value is 100. The next plot or point that I see is 120. And if I subtract 120 by 100, I get 20. So my change is 20, that's my numerator. then my plot is at 10 for number of cards sold. So my equation is 20 over 10, or if I simplify it, it's 2 over 1, and 2 over 1 we know is 2. What does the rate of change represent? Let's take a look at that graph again. Our rate of change, meaning, so this question's asking, what does this rate of change, what does this line represent? And this line is basically the amount of money the school makes for each card sold. So the change is the more amount of cards sold, the more money we're going to earn. So the number of cards that are sold is down here. So as I sell my 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, the amount goes from 100. We start at 100. And then we increase by $20 at every point. It says in letter D, what is the initial value and what does it represent? Let's take a look at our graph again. Our initial value is that point where we start off, where this red line starts. Initial means where we begin. So where do we begin? At what amount? $100. And that represents the leftover money from last year. That's why we don't start at 0. We started here because it says has money left over from last year's fundraiser. Now we're going to use the answers we have up here to write an equation that shows the amount of money the school will have, including the leftover money and the amount earned selling X number of cards. Okay? So remember when we said y equals mx plus b, right? Y is going to equal your m, which is your slope. Okay? And up here, we said that our rate of change, that's our slope. Our rate of change is 20 over 10. Okay? It changes from 100 to 120. That gave us that 20. And then we sold off 10 cards when that happened. Okay? That equals 2 over 1 or 2. So my m is going to be 2. My x is unknown. Plus whatever my initial value is. And in this case, it says that my initial value, I answered that question, is 100. So my equation that I formed from this graph is y equals 2x plus 100.